So this is how bad I have failed the Seethings Throws for mind control. Dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum. It's that bad.
It said,
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is Freddie Biz. I'm gonna sing If I Were a Butterfly. Here it goes. If I were a butterfly, I'd fly in the sky, 'cause Jesus knows why. And if I were a fish in the sea, I'd ask the Lord that I could see. And if I were a mockingbird, I'd thank the Lord that I was a bird. And if I were a bee in the sky, I thank the Lord that I could fly. Rocking hard every single day. Lord is the one in original way. We got Dog Bark Gospel Channel for you. He's got a harmonica that always comes through. Step into the middle and step into the front. Don't forget about our man, Pastor Paul. He takes us out to lunch. Bow tie doing it really big. He ain't no pig. He might take a swig. Oh my gosh, what was that? I think it was a locomotive, maybe even that. Back and forth and back. I'm rapping on the mic and that is a fact. In old Sacramento, tomato, cemento, a mama mento. And when we're on the microphone, we come so dang tough, rough, tough. I don't think you got the stuff. You ain't got the stuff like me. You ain't got the stuff like me. I said, you don't got the stuff like me. I don't roll in a tree. I'm not a baboon. I'm not a baboon, G. I come up soft. I come up tall. I drink my coffee. I do it like the Gaddafi. And we're stepping to the middle at the center. Doing it big up in this monumental. Alright.
to see the man they call the friend of sinners. Well, I just want to say, Lord, have mercy on me. Yeah. I know you died on the cross for the ungodly. And I know, dear Jesus, that included me. That's why I want to see the man they call the friend of sinners. I just want to say, Lord, have mercy on me. Well, I know you died on the cross for the ungodly. And I know, dear Jesus, that included me. I know the call girl and the tax man, Republican, probably Democrat too. Yeah, the call girl and the tax man, you made their life brand new. I clean up my mind, fix my heart, make me so pure within. I just want to experience your power that makes me free from sin. Yeah, I know the call girl and the tax man, Republican. You're probably Democrat too. Well, the call girl, yeah, the tax man, you made their life brand new. Clean up my mind, fix my heart, make me so pure within. I want to experience your power that makes me free from sin. I want to see the man they call a friend of sinners. Well, I just want to say, Lord, Lord, have mercy on me. I know you died on the cross for the ungodly. And I know, dear Jesus, that included me. Yeah, that's why I want to see the man they call the friend of sinners.
All right. Way to go, Dog Bark. If you want to meet Dog Bark in person, you can always find him here at Living Stones. You can come to the 9 a.m. estuary on Sunday morning. He won't be playing his harmonica, but he will tell you about the Uber driver that he has every week, usually a Muslim or a Sikh or someone from all over the world. And Dog Bark and Freddie are some special treasures. You can also see them on the Freddie and Paul show every week, along with Fancy Nancy, who gives the sermon report, and Charles J., who will do some rapping and dancing, and that's what we are doing. Well, today we have a really special guest. We have Laremy DeVries. Now, I had never met a DeVries with the first name of Laremy before, but yeah, I don't know. We'll have to get into that. But I met Laremy on CRC Voices, and he had found my videos. And Laremy has a very interesting story. So we're gonna first get into his story, and then we're gonna get into a bunch of things. Probably some of his critiques of stuff he's heard on my channel. Maybe a little bit of Herman Dooyeweerd. I mean, this Dooyeweerd emergence into the corner has been fascinating. CW's persistent work for a very long time has paid off. Roy Clauser is making the rounds, and Laremy, you might be next. So welcome, Laremy. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Everything's working. You can hear me and all that?
I hear you just fine.
Perfect. Good. I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world, so I had to scramble to get some stuff together. So glad it's working.
All right. Well, we're gonna start out with something of a randos conversation because
Sweet.
You're new to the corner.
I'm very random.
Why don't you tell me about the home you grew up in?
I grew up in the first 10 years of my life, I was born in 1979. I lived for 32 days of the 1970s. So, whatever that means. But I grew up in on a farm outside of Sully, Iowa. Do you know that place?
I've heard of it. Never been there.
Oh man, it's a booming metropolis. It's kind of a unique, just isolated little space, little town. And it was the 80s. So farm crisis is going on. My dad actually went bankrupt when I was in kindergarten. He started working at Vermeer Manufacturing in Pella, as a lot of farmers. When you lose the farm, you stay on the farm, but yet go find work in town. So it was. I'm the youngest of three sons, but we were all kind of 4 years apart. So I would say I spent a lot of my early life in a kind of isolation. I mean, just playing by myself, on the farm. Very imaginative world, very much of a Lego world, a G.I. Joe world. And I always just yearned to even to live in the town of Sully would have been a dream for me. When I was 10, my older brother started high school. And so we decided to move to Pella because, again, this feels very normal to me. It feels like a sort of normal rural CRC kind of a thing. There's a central metropolis, and then there's a kind of whatever, the feeder schools, as we call them. So every town has its tiny little Christian school, and then all of these schools kind of feed into Pella Christian. So we moved to Pella. Again, you've probably been there, right?
I have been to Pella. My father went to high school at Pella Christian.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The church his father took was in Lighton, Iowa, when my father was a teenager. So then he went to Pella Christian. Then my grandfather actually took a call to Owen Sound, Ontario, and my father took his last year at Pella Christian as a boarder before he went to college.
Oh, interesting. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I had a great all in all, like a pretty great childhood. I would say a pretty normal, again, Pella's the kind of town where kids are pretty free to ride their bikes around, ride your bike to the pool, hang out with your neighborhood friends, get into occasional mischief, like, TPing, stuff like that. That was big when I was in high school. And yeah,
you sort of had a small town American experience growing up.
But in sort of like a grunge Norman Rockwell, like it's still the 90s. We're listening to Nirvana and Weezer, and I played guitar, and so it wasn't quite 1950s. Although I will say, Sully is one of those places that is like sealed in amber. Like the CRC that I grew up in reminds me so much of the stories that my father-in-law would tell about Edgerton, Minnesota in the 1950s and 60s. Sitting there with no air conditioning in church, just the fan on me while we, sitting through whatever. It's just a very typical, do you know Carl Klompine?
Yeah, I've heard the name.
He's got a bunch of sons too who are pastors. But he's just, old school. Like he's the guy who baptized me. And so the first 10 years of my life could have been, lived in the 60s or the 70s or, other than I suppose the Legos and G.I. Joes.
But you should talk a little bit about growing up Christian Reformed, because people will sort of identify with riding your bike, getting into trouble, houses. But the growing up Christian Reformed for a lot of the people who watch this, that's the alien part. And you sort of touched on it I went to Pella when I went to Synod when it was in Pella, joint CRC RCA Synod. And then I took a little trip out to Lighton. And even for me, who remembers the 60s and 70s, visiting that Lighton, Iowa church with a former pastor who was also in for Synod. And I was looking around and saying, I could so very much see my grandfather preaching here and my father sitting in one of these pews.
Yeah. Things, culture just takes a while to filter down to places like that. So, before, when I lived in Sully, again, it's just this isolated place. We thought to be unequally yoked was to marry somebody from the RCA.
Yep.
There was a CRC and an RCA. I think there was one like community church, but that was the water we swam in. That's all we thought there was in the world. We didn't have Dobson on the radio yet, right? There wasn't a broader American Christian culture. There was our church, there was the CRC. I guess we had heard of Catholics, maybe we had heard of Baptists, but we had never met any such people or Lutherans or anything else. Like mainline, I don't know what that meant.
But
And-
Pella would have been a little different, though.
Oh, yeah. So
Pella was diverse.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Pella was different. And I think just the way that, again, the way the culture sort of was filtering in faster in the 90s. We had cable television. We had MTV. The people in Sioux Center did not have MTV in the 90s. But in Pella, we got to have MTV. So, we could look at people like Kurt Cobain, and we could sort of see this broader culture and connect to that. The internet arrived sometime when I was in high school, which, again, what did I use the internet for? I discovered that you can find chords to all of the songs that anybody ever plays on the internet. And so I would sit in my basement, print these things off on my dot matrix printer, and just that's how I learned to play guitar. But yeah, church twice on Sunday, no question about that. There just weren't questions. These weren't options. There had to be, a couple of feet of snow if we were going to skip church.
Yeah. Yeah, and even then, that's a modern. I don't think in my father's day they ever canceled church.
Oh no, we didn't cancel church. But I lived on a farm, and we had like a quarter-mile long driveway, and so it was we would listen to First Pella on the radio and still have to sit there,
And again, I want people to listen to this and remember this dude's talking about the 90s.
Oh yeah.
And for those, I know, so I've been putting a lot of CRC stuff on the channel because it's synod time.
Yeah.
And this is really important background for sort of understanding what's going on in the CRC now.
Yeah, let me add two things. Here's a good CRC word that you will appreciate. House bazook was a very big deal. So that was like elder visitation, and you put on your Sunday clothes, you take a bath or a shower before they come. So you're like, it's summertime, I'm out playing in the yard or whatever. You get called in, elders are coming. I was not impressed, but sit there, right? They ask you questions, but make sure they check up on your faith life development. And it wasn't mean. They weren't trying to bust you or get you into trouble, but it was just sort of how it went. And we still do that. I don't know if you do that at your church, but we still have that at our church. And it's more, I think, now focused on something like community building. It's not really connected to church discipline or something like that.
It's interesting. I didn't figure this out until just a few years ago when I was doing a little bit of research into rhythms of the Lord's Supper. And I was looking at the medieval Catholic Church, and I noticed that in Catholicism, in many places, you had to take confession before you took communion because you didn't want to partake in an unworthy manner. And it was always interesting to me that Heisbazuk in the CRC was, it was very, these were people checking up on you. And I always wondered, why is this? And then when I became an elder at Madison Square was really trying to transform this and have it not be. And so then I really wondered, where did this tradition come from? And I think actually because communion happened quarterly in the CRC. And so, of course, you had the preparation Sunday, and then and now if you're doing even communion monthly, then you have 2 services in a month, always tied up with, reading long forms. I think actually house visitation arose out of something, a replacement for the confessional. And so the elders were there to find your sin and help you realize your sin so that you could confess your sin, so that you could partake in a clean conscience. But that also sort of developed the habit in the Christian Reformed Church where, everybody was sitting there having communion in the Christian Reformed Church, but you knew who the really holy people were because they didn't partake, because they were the ones who knew their sin even better.
Yeah.
And so they were the ones that didn't have communion because they thought that they had sinned in some way that meant they shouldn't take communion. But in a sort of weird way, then everybody in the church looks at them and says, they must be really holy, rather than those of us who are just kind of normal sinners that are taking it anyway. So the truly holy people don't even take communion. And it's just interesting how, but of course, in the Christian Reformed Church, you're sort of naive to this. This is just sort of the way things happen. And again, I remember house visitation once growing up. And I remember I was kind of a salty teenager at that point, and these two elders came, and I had known these men all my life, and they were the most
like Salty the Big Blue Hymn Book.
Not that kind of salty. I was more like sea estuary salty. And so we had a house visitation, and so the elders were coming in to ask questions, and I was kind of a snot-nosed teenager, and I was a little bit of a jerk to them. I was like, "You coming in here now? I mean, we've never done this before. Why now? Has something happened that, and I was being a jerk. And I look back and now, somebody should have hit me. But say that on the internet now. This could get me demonetized. But anyway, so and
let me add a
go ahead.
Can I add a slightly more sinister view of House Bazook?
Sure.
You've been to the Netherlands, right?
Yes.
In the Netherlands, it still sort of feels like this. People put lace curtains on their windows. And they keep their windows very clean. Like there's a sort of like having the ability to look in on someone's home is a kind of a big deal. Yeah. And that old phrase, cleanliness is next to godliness. I think that they don't want you to just go to the confessional. They want to enter into your home. Like, is it clean? Is it put together? This is sort of like, Passover looking for that last crumb of yeast or something like that. Maybe that's real, maybe that's not real, but there's something to it there.
In many Dutch CRC homes too, you still had the parlor, which was the nice front room that as a kid, you didn't play in, you didn't dirty. The room was always set. If the domini, which for those of you who don't understand, that means the Lord, which is the minister. If the domini comes by, the parlor had better be set. You had better have cookies and coffee for the domini. And kids should scrub up and put on better clothes and sit there. And I mean, this was a very ordered, structured society. And part of the point I'm making is that in the Christian Reformed Church, the transitions that the church has been going through, it isn't like the Christian Reformed Church uniformly has been going through a transition. The Christian Reformed Church has been going through different transitions and radically different speeds in different places. So you can go to Sully, Iowa today, or some of the places I can mention that my grandfather preached in. I noticed that there were 2 overtures from a woman who is a member of the church in Hancock, Minnesota, a church that my grandfather pastored. But what happens is that you can sort of visit in a weird way, but not completely. You can sort of do time travel in the Christian Reformed Church by going to different places. And, for example, this big fight the Christian Reformed Church is having right now, that means that all of the members of the time travel, I mean, we like to say, we give our dead ancestors a voice at the table. Well, in the Christian Reformed Synod, they're not dead, but your ancestors still have a voice at the table because they go to Synod. So anyway, I'm sorry, I should not interrupt your
No, that's fine.
Please
it's
continue.
Great. It's just it is all really fascinating, and I mean, there's a Lake Wobegon-ness to all of this, of course, but I do think that people don't quite get that rural experience,
Yes.
So anyway, hopefully that sort of colors that. Yeah,
or it's romanticized. I mean, watch. What if you build it, they will come.
Field of Dreams, my favorite movie.
I mean, Iowa.
Yeah,
it's just romantic. Even Star Trek romanticized Iowa because, of course, Kirk was a kid from the cornfields. And Interstellar sort of then makes a bizarro twist to all of that. So,
but this is part of the Caitlin Clark effect also, right? Do you know who Caitlin Clark is?
No.
Oh, she's anyway. She's a women's basketball player who's like, but part of this image of her is she's an Iowan, and so she's I don't know. There's something about that romanticized
Well,
back in
and
time.
the Iowa caucuses.
Oh yeah,
You
for sure.
guys have an enormous impact on American politics.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not talking about politics, though. That'll get dangerous.
Yeah, we're talking about religion. Any less dangerous? Anyway, so
all right, let me shift gears. I want to say one thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so here we are in Pella. You've been talking a lot about that circulatory system of the CRC.
Yeah.
And, a couple of just kind of high school memories. Do you remember convention? Is that a thing that you didn't go to? But
the Calvinist convention.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it used to be called. The
Sure,
Young Calvinist Convention, because we were growing up and it was the Calvinist Cadet Corps. You can still hear Freddie with the Calvinist Cadet motto. He's got it burned inside his brain.
Which one is that? A cadet must be passionate,
loyal, faithful, industrious, cheerful.
Yeah,
You'll hear it regularly on the Freddie and Paul show.
Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, did all that. But those were the kinds of things that like kept people together, right? Like these are intentional. Like it's not just the circulatory system of Calvin and Grand Rapids, but it's also like there's just this whole CRC diaspora. Let's get the kids together. Maybe there'll be what do they used to say? There's blue and there's pink. Don't make purple, if you know what I mean. But a little of that is maybe okay. But you meet these people, and then you go to a place like Dordt College or Dordt University, as it's called now. And you're like, oh, yeah, we had this shared experience. Oh, I remember Ken Meadham at the San Diego convention, blah, blah, blah. Right. And these are the kinds of, like emotional bond builders that I think the CRC was very intentional about up until the 90s. I don't know when this kind of ended, but I sort of feel like a little bit of like a last generation to have kind of been through that intentional experience.
Yeah.
And now we don't really do it anymore.
Yeah. Jamie Smith would call these, these in many ways were the liturgies of the CRC.
Sure. Yeah.
And they were formative.
Mm-hmm.
And so when, for example, at Synod, when Rita is asking, can my children be CRC if they don't toe the line on the HSR?
Yep.
She's not, this is where it gets really weird in the conversation right now, because in some ways, if you listen to, it's not out in the channel, but Clay Leibold talking about, this confessionalism that's alien to the CRC.
Yeah,
but you've got a whole group of people who didn't grow up CRC.
Yeah.
And they're like, but when I got here, you were all talking confessions. And it's like, yeah, we were. But in some ways, the Young Calvinist Convention and cadets and Heispazuk and the evening service, these were liturgical in some ways that perhaps were stronger in terms of a formation than the written confessions were.
Sure. And you take the yearbook along with you on vacation. And when it's Sunday, you find the nearest CRC and you play Dutch bingo, and you inevitably, that familial, and this is a challenge, right? Because the bad side of the coin is you ain't Dutch, you ain't much.
Yeah.
But the realistic side of the coin, but it's not a coin anymore. Now it's a dice or something. But like, there's obviously the realism of like, you cannot maintain either practically or even in good conscience a ethnically pure religious system.
Right.
And that it was never, I don't think that was the point.
No.
But at the same time that those ethnic roots were tended to in a very intentional way.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be forgotten that if you go back into the annals of Synod, what's interesting, if you go back in CRC history, there are certain issues that sort of possess the conversation. One of them was the question of whether you could baptize adopted children.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that was a big issue. And so, and now probably a lot of those children would have also been Dutch.
Sure.
From Bethany Home and things like this, because the CRC established those institutions. But you're very right that in many ways, much of this liturgy was formed before the Second World War.
Sure.
Even before the First World War, before there was this mixture in terms of American society. Dutchmen would move as a group to colony areas. They would build institutions together. They would isolate from the others, in that you went to Christian school, and if the colony was broad enough, you would go to Christian school K through 12.
Yep.
You would, if you were lucky enough, you probably came to America to work on a dairy, but your aspiration was to own a dairy and then to pass dairies down to your children.
Yep.
So the Christian Reformed Church was, in many ways, operating as a little insular subculture.
Sure.
Which, of course, the Second World War comes and sort of scrambles that. But many of that strong formation and identity, survived then intergenerationally into the 80s and 90s. But because by about that point, I'm a teenager. I'm a college student in the 80s. I'm a teenager in the 70s. But you already see it breaking down.
Yep. Yeah, and another maybe interesting point. So my father's father, was an immigrant, and he came over kind of between the world wars. A really weird, certainly not a part of a wave of immigration. Part of, I think he had some other family in the area, and it was kind of during the Depression. And so he started off as a door-to-door Raleigh spice salesman. But with that same, then renting a farm and eventually owning a farm, and with the dream of passing that farm down through the generations. Who's that? I want to blame Ronald Reagan, and who was the Treasury Secretary at the time. It'll come to me in a little bit, but anyway, I want to blame those guys for jacking up interest rates and making that not happen. But that's again, we're not talking politics here, are we?
Well, you can go all the way back to the Dust Bowl years and hating the bankers,
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
So, okay. So you're at Pella, you're in high school.
Wanted to avoid going to Dordt with every, part of
because
my
there's
being.
not just one circulatory system in the other.
No.
There's this Dordt circulatory system.
We have,
too.
and what are those little extra, like, I don't know, arteries or, some additional pumping that happens.
Yep.
I was, I went for one of those famous Fridays at Calvin visits. I was really going to be the guy who went to Calvin, but again, it was the 90s, and I was kind of a youngest kid slacker, and so Dordt was just, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or be with my life, but I knew I didn't want to go work at Vermeer or Pellicorp, and that was kind of, those are the tracks. You graduate high school and you do this, or you go to Dordt. And my brother had gone to Dordt. My mother had gone to Dordt. So, it's a 5-hour drive from Pella. It just, felt good. But that's really where, I don't know that I had specifically heard the name Abraham Kuyper before I arrived at Dordt. And it was actually in an English class with the man who is now my father-in-law, who... Yeah, I married into, I love Dordt so much, I just married into it, but who introduced me to Abraham Kuyper, again, in our writing class. So that, it's 1998. That's how seriously Dordt took Kuyper.
Oh, yeah.
At that time.
Yeah.
And I would say still, maybe not as much, but it was everywhere and everything, Abraham Kuyper.
Maybe talk a little bit about Northwest Iowa as the alternative to Western Michigan, because of course Van Raalte goes to Western Michigan. That's sort of the original mothership. Yeah, in terms of Dutch immigration, in terms of mid-19th century Dutch immigration of rural people leaving the Netherlands. Of course, a lot of much earlier Dutch immigrations in New Amsterdam and such.
Sure.
But Northwest Iowa has a very particular history and a very particular culture, which is very much a part of the CRC, but is always sort of the Cambridge to Oxford, and it's always, there's a rivalry.
Medea to Mecca, is that how it goes? Yeah, I always say I have a mitten-sized chip on my shoulder, because there is and this is true in Pella as well. A sort of just not, we don't like anything about Michigan. I mean, it's not. We love it, right? These are brothers. This is Cain and Abel.
This is a rivalry.
This is
a
exactly,
brotherly rivalry.
Yeah, but even like the University of Michigan football team rivalry against the University of Iowa football team, like we take those things more seriously because of our, just don't quite like Grand Rapids. That's always kind of part of what happened. I think that if you should read a book sometime called Style and Class by Stanley Wiersma. That's probably a name that but he his pen name was Sietze Buning.
Yep.
And it's an interesting little story about Orange City versus Sioux Center written in poems. And it's just sort of fascinating. But part of the story, I think, of Iowa, again, this is a Little House on the Prairie story. It's a Lake Wobegon story, but these stories are built through hardship, built through the reality of you have to stick together if you're going to make it here on the wide open plains. Like, life is rough here. Winters are rough. There's, everything, right? There's flooding, there's tornadoes, it's just, I like to make jokes about, Michigan isn't insular, but it's peninsular. It has its own kind of ecosystem, and there's really only one way in and out. But we are the opposite of that. We are wide open, to everything. And, everything that wants to show up here, I guess. So yeah, it takes a more, it's a DIY kind of a culture. It's a rely on your neighbors kind of culture. It's one of my favorite Dutch phrases, like that kids would always say, is like zelf doen, like we can do it ourselves. And that's what Dordt is. That's what, Sioux Center Christian School here, which was also founded by B.J. Hahn, I think the oldest Christian school west of the Mississippi. We could do these things ourselves. And this is probably also why we love Abraham Kuyper so much, because he is I'm going to start my own denomination. I'm going to start my own political party. I'm going to start my own newspaper. I'm going to start my own, all of this stuff. So there's a kind of like, I don't always love that language of self-made man, because it's not self-made, it's community made, but it's a community made community. We made this. This is ours. That Onza idea, like it's more real for us. I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And B.J. Hahn, what's interesting too is that Americans don't know Canadian politics, but Canadians know American politics. Iowans know Grand Rapids politics, but people from Grand Rapids don't know Iowa.
Sure.
Always,
except for the New York Times is constantly writing stories about us. But
that's true. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in West Michigan that are just a little.
Yeah.
Why aren't they writing stories about us? At least Michigan is a swing state. At least they got that. But we won't talk about politics.
No, exactly. But everything has a political mode. So this is just.
So you go to Dordt, and it's so funny because I'm hard pressed to think in either college or seminary to hear much about Abraham Kuyper at Calvin College or Calvin Seminary in the 80s. My grandmother kept whittling down his library as they were at Raybrook Manor, and he was allowed finally one little bookshelf, and the last two books that went before he kind of had a stroke and dementia were Bavinck in Dutch and Kuyper in Dutch. And that was, it's like Grace, you're not getting these two volumes out of my fingers.
Dead.
But today, even when on Voices we talk to, they're Dordt grads.
Yeah.
Very Kuyperian.
Yeah.
But of course, Kuyper is an interesting animal because both sides, lots of people appeal to Kuyper for lots of different reasons.
When I hear Doug Wilson talk about Abraham Kuyper, I'm like, will the real Abraham Kuyper please stand up? Yeah, I mean, I had friends, like I said, who went to Calvin, and I studied philosophy. They studied philosophy, and when we compared notes, I was shocked at how little they knew of people like Kuyper and Dooyeweerd, and they were shocked at how little I knew of, Hegel or fill in the blank. So the philosophy department at Dordt. Do you know Roger Henderson? Is that a name you know?
No.
Okay. Someday maybe you'll meet. I think he lives in Santa Cruz. He has a way of appearing places. But he's
and maybe CW will track him down and drag him into the corner.
Probably.
Like poor Ray Klauser, who's still Ray sends me this email. He's like, there's people who are they're leaving comments and they've never read my book and they're getting stuff wrong. And I'm like, oh, CW, what have you done to this poor man? This is the internet.
And I'm a fair bit younger than Roy, but not that much farther behind him in my, I don't know, internet presence. Let's just put it that way. I've left a couple of comments. I love listening to your stuff while I'm, making doughy things, pizza crusts or bagels at the Fruity Plain. It gets me through my afternoons and sparks all sorts of ideas, but it never dawns on me to leave a comment, to join in the conversation. Like that's why I'm dragging you here.
Exactly. So you're going to Dordt College. What are some of the things that are sort of opening up in your life now as a college student away from home and in the big metropolitan world of Dordt in the midst of the cornfields?
Well, it's funny. Back in those days, we had loads of Canadians. There was probably almost 15% of the student body was Canadian. And there were people from, all over America. So while certainly, Sioux Center, we did not have a movie theater, thanks BJ Hahn. That's an inside joke, but you could Google it. But it was a kind of, it was like that kind of diaspora diverse student body, right? Most of the people had Dutch last names. I would say, probably 80-ish% had some kind of Christian school in their background, just Bible knowledge, just very literate in the Bible. And pretty, not super, we weren't catechized. The thing I was going to say about Abraham Kuyper is it all just made sense, right? Like I hear Abraham Kuyper for the first time. I read Calvinism as a life system in the Stone lectures. And I'm like, oh yeah, like this is just how there was no, use the word all the time. Opposite something, like I didn't
the opponent processing.
Yeah. I didn't have to do any of that. Like it just sat right with me. It's like, oh yeah, like this way of life was exemplified to me in Sully. It was exemplified to me in Pella. It was exemplified to me by my high school teachers. It was never labeled. It was just the way. It was the way that we lived our lives. And again, there weren't a lot of other ways there. It was kind of the way. So, as we started, studying Kuyper, studying, St. Augustine, Roy will probably get mad at me because I said that. But just going through this philosophy course, and even in the ways that, we studied logic, the ways that we studied ancient philosophy, all of these things were kind of couched within this, a kind of basic Dooyeweerdian critique of ground motives and like, I don't know how to say this exactly. Like the reason you read Aristotle is because of something like common grace. Like it's not that he has nothing to say. The reason you read Marx, the reason you read Nietzsche, the reason you read all of these people, it's not like you're so isolated as to ignore the outside world, but it all does kind of enter through a sort of,
keep talking. I got tree trimmers here.
Okay.
So it's your show. Keep talking.
All right. That's my show. Yeah. A kind of, yeah, this is the way. Maybe I want to think about it that way. Roy Clauser actually came to Dordt as a guest lecturer when I was a student. So that was kind of interesting. I got to meet him in, the year 2000 or something like that. The engineering department, Charlie Adams was a big famous engineering professor at Dordt, and he was very Dooyeweerd obsessed. So even in the kind of practical sciences, there's Dooyeweerd. Dooyeweerd shows up. The way we talk about math, right? That whole, there is nothing neutral. Math is not a neutral thing. It all shows up. So I talked a little bit ago about everything kind of being filtered through this idea of Dooyeweerd's ground motives. Roy pointed this out in maybe not a very specific way, but one of the big critiques of both, I think, Kuyper, maybe not explicitly, but certainly Dooyeweerd explicitly, is to say every other philosophical tradition is tied up in dualism. Everything is dualistic. And so the, biggest Molotov cocktail you could throw at somebody when I was at Dordt, and I still kind of is, you're being a dualist. You can't be a dualist. All of life is redeemed. Every square inch. There's no dualism allowed. So nature, grace, Catholic dualism, get rid of it. Form, matter, Greek dualism, get rid of it. Nature, freedom, modern philosophy, dualism, get rid of it. Like I said, I don't think that. Sorry, I'm talking too much now.
You had to talk. I had to open the gate for the tree guys. The power company is taking down a giant sequoia.
Oh boy!
From and a even bigger cedar. Wow. That is on our property. That we had.
Did they let you keep and sell the lumber?
If I had someone to give it to, I could. But no, I'm having them haul it away. We had an even bigger. We had 4 mammoth trees fall winter of 2023, and it wreaked a lot of havoc with the power company. So they're preemptive strike on the poor huge trees. Anyway, so you're talking about this, and again, this is really hard for a lot of people to understand that there is a world like this.
Sure.
And as is true of philosophy, there's sort of this level of, you get this education and now suddenly you can articulate using all of these fancy words, all of these dualisms. But that philosophy, in fact, was baked into a culture. And so people who had never read Dooyeweerd or Kuyper or any of this philosophical stuff, it was still sort of built into their systems under the surface. But now, of course, with continual sort of encroachment of ideas, reading different books, you're gonna have movement underneath that. The people who are sort of monitoring the philosophical systems will begin to get annoyed because they're finding emergences coming up, and they're like, where did that come from? We thought our philosophy was supposed to banish that from our people, but no, they have cable television and now the internet. So here it comes.
And you have, I remember being out of college and Piper is sort of just becoming popular. And there's some Time magazine article about like the rise of Calvinism. And I was like, wait a minute, like we've been here the whole time. Like, what is going on? Like, and again, there's all of these people who lay different claims to different types and different flavors of Calvinism. And I think the same thing was true of, certainly of Kuyper and certainly of Dooyeweerd. But it's like we had a school of thought in the kind of old-fashioned way. And this was our school of thought. And it's not that. Here's the thing I like to say is maybe being out of my cage stage, Dooyeweerdianism. There's 2 ways of looking at the whole Kuyper Dooyeweerd tradition. One of them is to say that everybody's wrong. So you can have a critique for every single other school of thought. They're wrong because of this. They get the notion of self wrong. They get the, this is a little bit like what Roy Clauser was doing. And this is not, I'm not trying to criticize him. I was watching that, what's his name? Christian Baxter. I was watching that Roy Clauser video also, and sort of thinking to myself, man, I can't wait to be 80, because that guy, like, there's a freedom. Like, he just can sort of say whatever he wants. And that's not that I disagree with him, but like, if you're reading a little bit between the lines about the way that he's defining the word eternity, did you watch the Christian Baxter video?
I haven't seen I didn't see the whole Christian
Well, he's
Baxter
talking
video.
about how we define eternity in a Platonic sense, which is something that lasts forever. But that's not ever how the Bible writers, that's not how Jesus meant it. So if you're going to say that they are banished to the lake of fire or kicked out of whatever, he's not saying that's for eternity. He's saying that's for an age. And I'm like, oh, now I see why you're kind of an Orthodox person, and you kind of sound like David Bentley Hart's description of hell more as a purging, and eventually after your age of hell is done, then every knee will bow and every tongue confess. Like, if I said those sorts of things, I think people would be like, oh, that's not very CRC of you. But Roy Clauser is, he's 80. He can do what he wants. It's great. There's a freedom to that, right?
All right, so I had to go help the tree guys, and
Sure.
we left you at and you were talking about Kuiper and Dooyeweerd. When did you decide?
Can I make one other quick point?
Yeah,
about
go ahead.
Dooyeweerd? So
Sure.
the one school of thought, or the one side of the coin, is everybody's wrong. The other side of the coin is everybody's right. Like, because they're all responding to this one world that is God's world, God's created world. Everything that's here has been created by God. You can learn from these people. So you should read Marx, and you should say, wow, how is Marx, like, the way I like to think about it is you can say everybody has a point, right? This guy really has a point in his critique of capitalism. We should learn from that and listen to that. And if we look at, this is a conversation I have with students a lot. If we're struggling with like a transgender kind of a question, we could say, well, they're totally wrong. But we can also maybe ask, what critiques do they have of like the negative parts of the way we think about gender? What can we learn from them? How can we, let me quote Field of Dreams for a moment, ease his pain. How can we, how can we ease their pain? How can we work? How can we say these people, however much I disagree with them, are because they're responding to God's world, God's created world, God's laws, God's commands. Dooyeweerd would say, even the Nazi regime was still responding to God's structure of creating a government. They weren't doing it very well, but they're still, this is where we get the language of structure and direction. There's a created structure that God made. There's a direction that we as humans, when we make stuff, we're responding to the structure, and then we're developing it in sort of better or worse ways. So anyway, sorry, go on with your next question.
No, I wanted you to get, you're right. You had to get the second point in. So when did you decide you wanted to be, were you a philosophy major at Dordt then?
Yeah. I was one of those, this is probably a story that you'll hear from a lot of people. I liked arguing. I didn't know what I wanted to be with my life. So I thought, well, I'll start pre-law. So then as a kind of, I decided to study political science and philosophy. Those seemed interesting to me. And, I took my first philosophy course as a freshman, and I really liked it. And then, the aforementioned Roger Henderson was hired. John Vanderstelt, is that a name that you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he retired. I never had him for class. He retired after my freshman year, and then Roger Henderson came in. And so between him and my other philosophy professor, Mark Taslar, it was kind of this cadre of misfits a lot of pre-sem kids who were philosophy majors. And it was a good community that sort of drew me in. And obviously political science, philosophy, Abraham Kuyper, all of this stuff fits together, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
instead of thinking then about law school, I just sort of thought about, I don't know what, political theory, like more that side of things, like the theoretical side of things as opposed to the like practical, I'm going to be a politician side of things.
I have to, I don't know what CW is going on about, but
ask about John Cock. Yeah. I'm trying to, I got the comments going over here, but I can't.
No, I
can't
completely
multitask,
understand.
yeah.
You can't, but I don't know why CW is losing it. I'm trolling him now. I'm trying to extort money out of him. This is an old inside joke because he puts in super chats and I ignore them. And so then he says, ask about John Cock. He keeps saying John Cock. And it's like, oh, where's the super chat now, CW, huh? Maybe if you pay me, I'll ask it.
So, yeah. So John Cock.
What is CW talking about?
With John Cock?
Yeah.
So he also, he didn't retire, but he had moved into a dean position when I was starting Dordt. But he was, I don't know, another one of these he was kind of a bridge between Vanderstelt and Roger Henderson. He wrote a book called Patterns of the Western Mind, which was the text in the Dordt philosophy class for a lot of years. Which again, it's the kind of ground motive sort of presupposition. What are your presuppositions that you're working out of? How do you? Yeah, very Vollenhoven. John Cock was the Vollen. So everybody else, you got Cal Seerveld, you got Al Walters, you got these guys who are Brian Walsh and Middleton, like the sort of 80s guys who are high on Dooyeweerd, and then Cock wanted to kind of be the alternative and study Vollenhoven. So that was kind of his love. Look it up on Wikipedia. I don't know. So Vollenhoven,
you can't.
They were brothers-in-law.
Too hard because
well, and one other interesting thing, like Dooyeweerd never actually taught in the philosophy department at the Free University. He was always in the sort of law department. So Vollenhoven, even though these people, called themselves Dooyeweerdians, it was really Vollenhoven who was the philosopher at the Free University who was educating them all. And Dooyeweerd was, there's always, it's double Dutch, right? We always do things in pairs. You got Kuyper and Bavinck, you got Vollenhoven and Dooyeweerd.
All right. So sorry. We'll ignore it. So CW, you just had your thing. So anyway, part of the problem is if you say someone like John Cock in the CRC, it's like there are dozens of them.
Sure.
When I read it, if I don't recognize the name, it's like, Ryan Cock. Our
pastor now is Joel Cock.
Yeah, there's Cocks all over the place. Which, boy, this could get me demonetized too. Anyway. So,
it means cook.
Yeah. So
Han means rooster.
Gosh, CW, you just destroyed the live stream. You destroyed the flow.
No, I can get back.
All right. So you decide to study philosophy. And you dig it. You dig it. You like it. So you got your degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
And then you did what?
What did philosophers do?
What? No, not what did all philosophers do. See, it's funny because if you graduated from Calvin in the 40s and 50s and 60s, if you were a good student, the next step that you would do would be to go to the Free University. But if you graduated from Calvin in the 80s and 90s, nobody went to Free University. They'd want to go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Princeton. So, but again, part of what's really interesting in the Christian Reformed Church and its different colony areas is that even though you get these different even subcultures within the Christian Reformed Church, and again, the Dordt circulatory system is still there. And what's interesting is that, again, George Marsden used to talk about the fact that when he went to Harvard and he told people he was a Calvinist, people looked at him like he was a dinosaur. So if you go to Grand Rapids and maybe you say you're Dooyeweerdian, some people in Grand Rapids might look like, oh yeah, I remember Evan Runner, but that's about as deep as it goes. So
Sure.
you Dordt folks are keeping the tradition alive. So you go all the way. Iowa boy goes to Europe.
Absolutely. So first I spent the first 2 years out of Dordt starting a coffee shop. So my life, let's see, Dordt Dooyeweerdian cafe host comes into the corner. My life has alternated between academics and coffee because, again, what else we don't have marketable skills. There's nobody in the placement office who meets with the philosophy students who are like, oh, this is what you should do with your lives. So one of my buddies who was an art student, again, these are cliches. This is what happens. Dordt was just building this new campus center. And so they had this space in it for a coffee shop. And so my buddy and I were like, hey, it was kind of like, it was a great like AA version of running our own business. Dordt owned all the stuff. We rented it from them, but we were running our own business. So yeah, if you went to the Synod at Dordt circa 2004, 2003, if you were there, you probably went to a little coffee shop on campus called the Humble Bean.
I don't drink coffee.
Oh, okay. Now you just ruined the live stream.
Laramie's going to leave now.
I'm just joking. I thought you were CRC. That's part of that's what we do.
I
drink coffee.
I'm a very strange person.
Anyway, so I did that for a couple of years, got married. And then, so I have Roger Henderson in one ear saying, there's an international program at the Free University, an international master's program called Studies of Science and Society. So you kind of take this Kuyperian classwork, and then when you do your thesis, you can go kind of the social science route or the more, sciencey science route. He's like, you should really do that. And then I have John Vanderstelt in my other ear who's telling me, you need to go to the ICS. Laremy, go to the ICS, he would say all the time. And because for him, like, again, Amsterdam was, we left there, right? We've started our own institution. It's called the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, Canada, and all of these amazing, again, American and Canadian sort of people are teaching there. It's vibrant. It's interesting. We need to kind of keep this place going and make it grow. So these are the two people telling me what to do with my life. In the end, I sided with Roger Henderson because Amsterdam, right? Like, who doesn't want to live
They say
in
Toronto
the Netherlands?
is clean, but going to Europe.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Forget about it. So I had just gotten married to my wife. We were, this was our first year of marriage. And we spent it, we actually lived in Den Haag with a family. Again, we found this in the banner. There's a Jim Scott found this in the banner and showed it to us. Mom from one of those Vancouver suburbs, which I can't remember which one. It'll come to me later. So Canadian mom, who's also like, her dad was American. Her grandpa preached at Bethel here. Dutch husband, Sikh live-in nanny in Den Haag. So we were like, oh, this is great, right? You got this bilingual family, a bunch of there were two little kids and one was born while we were there. So this is perfect. We got a place to live. We can eat, we can sleep, even if it is like, about the size of a prison cell. This is our first year of marriage and we're spending it with another family. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, that's lovely.
It's funny. But we were at the fourth floor of the, shoebox row house that they were living. Very nice. I don't mean shoebox in a negative way, but stacked, right? That's how they do things in Nederland. They got to stack it. Yeah. So then I went to the Free University and it was great. I don't know, like maybe Sandra Griffin, is that a name that you know?
No.
All right. Hank Hertzma.
No.
You don't know.
See, it's a different circulatory system.
It is. It absolutely is. And do you ever read Philosopha Reformata? No, you don't. Anyway, maybe CW Weeks knows what I'm talking about there.
Maybe CW knows. Yeah. Dutch bingo falling flat. Hey,
but this
Christian,
is like
Christian told me my mic was too low. Is my mic better, Christian? Let me know in the comment. Right. But because I always say something loud and I blow it off, and StreamYard then lowers the level of my mic. Yeah. And anyway, keep going.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. This is, again, a very Calvinist way of thinking about your life. But I often tell people the thing that I thought I was doing is never the thing I thought I was going someplace to learn was never quite the thing that I was going someplace to learn. But then that always kind of flips back on itself as well. But it all of these things like feel providential, So yeah, we lived with a family. So it gave us a real, echte, like a real Dutch experience. We ate dinner with this family. We had vla, which, have you ever had vla? It's like pudding, like it's the, you're a real, my grandmother, every day of her life. I spent a lot of time as a youngest kid. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. Big breakfast, finish breakfast. The next thing you do is make pudding. And you put the pudding in the fridge, and after your big lunch, then you eat the pudding. Like, I don't know why Dutch people love pudding so much, but it really seemed like, and then you go to the Netherlands, and you're like, oh, look, here's a whole dairy case full of pudding. No, John, I did not. I did not like the herring. I'm sorry.
He's going to unsubscribe now.
I liked eel. I liked frites. We ate, horse meat. That's kind of what you do. The whole, spectrum of Indonesian food and Surinamese food and all of the flavors of Nederland we loved. Drop. I love drop. I love stroop. I love,
Oh gosh.
That's just for I am Frisian, of course.
We have so turned to the Dutch thing.
Anyway, Van Donk needs to go, so we can stop talking about that.
That's right. Because CW is here for the philosophy, but not the foods.
Yeah,
and not the ethnic food. So, what were your dominant impressions of studying in the Netherlands?
I loved it. So it was a little bit of a unique experience. So this cohort, I guess is the word, very international. I think there were about 10 of us. There was a guy from Japan. There was a guy from Korea. There was a woman from China. There was an Ethiopian, a German, several Dutch people. I was the only person, the program was in English, and I was the only native English speaker in the group. So I sort of found myself as a kind of triangulator, interpreter kind of for all of these people. But it also, it wasn't normal university life where you take this class. We weren't part of the student body. We were our own little ride the elevator up to the 14th floor, meet, do readings. Like getting a library card to the Dutch Royal, the KB, the Dutch Royal Library, and just scouring books. From there was I don't know, it was fun. It was a really great time in my life. We went to the American Protestant Church of The Hague. Tim Blackman, right? That's a guy
I know Tim Blackman very well.
Yeah. So that put us into.
Were you there when he was there?
We were not there when he was there, but his father was kind of the foundational pastor at that church. Yeah. So the Blackman family just cast a big shadow. I'm gonna have Tim on. I feel like I knew Tim before I ever met him. Okay. And when I finally did, he came to speak at Dordt once, and I mean, it was like we were old friends. I mean, it's that same kind of familial circulatory system. Whoever that person is, the Koninklijke Bibliotheek is exactly right. So we had a great church community. Obviously, we were traveling. We went to just all of the places that you go to. We went to Geneva, but we went to like Italy and France, and it was, just a great eye-opening year of our lives.
Now, this didn't afford you better employment opportunities, though. I mean, if getting a philosophical degree from Dordt is, you doubled down on poverty in this move.
Well, you're absolutely right, because our next move, my wife and I, visas were running out. So I did my coursework in a year, and then I went home and wrote my thesis. By home, I mean back to America. And then I actually defended my thesis via like a very original, old school Zoom type thing. I was at the University of Maryland. I had to like rent a room for like $300 to establish this internet link on a giant screen. It was, everybody thought it was amazing that this was happening. But
what was the thesis?
So my thesis, I was looking at a guy named Michael Walzer, who wrote a book called Spheres of Justice. Kind of a communitarian. He's from New Jersey, but also kind of influential in German politics. And it kind of, he's asking questions like, why is, I can't think of, like, what's wrong with prostitution? What's wrong with nepotism? What's wrong with, somebody buying their way out of military conscription? And kind of putting all these things all together to sort of develop a kind of secular version of sphere sovereignty is kind of what so I was comparing that with the kind of more Kuiperian, Dooyeweerdian version of sphere sovereignty, and I don't know, looking at similarities and differences. And so then, we moved to Annapolis, Maryland. My wife got a job at a Christian school there. And I thought, well, for sure. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I should not troll people.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great. I love it. I thought, well, for sure that I will, be able to get a job at some like think tank or something like that. Why is it slipping my brain? The Center for Public Justice was there. Jim Skillen, again, he was a former Dordt prof, so I kind of had connections with those people way back.
I didn't know that. Of course, Skillen and Center for Public Justice was something that was often around in my household growing up, but I didn't know it was a Dordt prof. That's interesting.
Yeah. Very briefly, but he kind of, I think, was probably instrumental in really fertilizing that Kuiperian worldview, especially when it came to politics and looking at politics in that way. And again, this is a story that I'm sure everybody knows. I didn't, because I'm stupid, maybe naive. I don't know. It's Larry from the farm, right? You go to DC and everybody will say, "Oh, we'd love to give you an internship. It just doesn't pay anything." Right. That's what you knock on every door. Your CV is amazing. We love you, but it doesn't pay.
We love free labor.
Go ahead for sure. And that seems to be DC in a nutshell.
Yep.
So I did the only other thing I know how to do. I got a job at a coffee shop. So the next couple of years of our lives, I was working on my thesis. We hung out with like the Skillens and, like befriended them. We went to the same church as them, et cetera, et cetera. But there was never really a, let's just say, professional developing relationship with the people at the CPJ. And that was fine, And then
you went back to Iowa.
And then I went back to Iowa. Again, the story of my life is a story told a million times. What happens when a young married couple is living, right across the street from the Naval Academy in a $1,000 a month, 1-bedroom apartment, and then you turn into your sort of, mid-late 20s, and somebody says you should have a baby, and then you have a baby, and then what do? Oh, you start looking at rent, you start looking at daycare, you start looking at, and you think to yourself, if I went home, maybe my father would give me a job as a hired hand.
You were feeding those pigs in Washington.
Absolutely. And then realize, it just, again, it makes sense. So that then again, my friend Roger Henderson and former professor was like, I need a sabbatical. I'm going to the Netherlands. His wife was Dutch. You know, he spent a lot of time. I mean, I could fill you a podcast with stories about Roger Henderson. That's a whole nother thing. He reminds me, what's your buddy? I'm going to just take a little sidebar here because, so here's my origin story with the corner. Burn Power, is that his name?
Power, yeah.
So,
from Tbilisi, Georgia.
Yes, there we go. So I had a brief stint as an Amazon hub delivery driver. So I'm driving across the gravel roads of Northwest Iowa, delivering Amazon packages and looking for something to listen to, specifically something about Dooyeweerdian. Go to the internet, go to YouTube, look up Dooyeweerdian. You're not going to find very much, but you will find Burn Power and his love for Hans Rookmacher.
Yes,
and
you will.
Hans Rookmacher, I was listening to these Hans Rookmacher lectures that were just like fascinating. The people in the French Revolution, they, like all of these, it's just amazing. And that, and also Burn Power's like fascinating, like history of the world.
Yeah.
That's, and
a lot of material for Amazon delivery driver.
Absolutely. But again, I'm a consumer of the internet, not a producer. So I never thought I should comment on these things. Although I think I did reach out to him once, just randomly. His story just reminds me a lot of Roger Henderson's stories, and they spent time at Labrie, and then the Labrie in the Netherlands, Eckenvale. That sounds familiar to me for some reason, but so I just wondered if they ever crossed paths. But Roger Henderson is a kind of like a kind of old hippie sort of, like he grew up in Berkeley in like 1969. And then traveled the world, somehow got converted. He's traveling the world with the Book of John and a dictionary, somehow finds his way to Labrie. From there, finds his way to the Free University. From there, finds his way to Iowa, of all places. So,
because that's where they're still doing the Free University.
That's where they're still doing.
Exactly.
Thing. For sure.
That's they're looking to America. Where can I go where there's a ready
and vice
audience
versa,
for this stuff?
right? John Vanderstelt is retiring. You can't just plug in some guy off the street. You got to go. You got to send your servant back to my father's house. Find the right professor. So
this was the reason my mother's family came to America. All Mr. White in New England industrialist, all his cows died and they needed new cows. So they went to the Netherlands to get the Frisian cows. And who came clinging to the cows but the Frisians? hence my maternal side in America. So
John, I visited Labrie, like as a tourist. I did not spend any time studying at Labrie, but I did go to like the town of Labrie. I was with my parents, we went to Geneva, all around. We went to Heidelberg and Geneva and Labrie. This was our reformational tour of Europe.
I was going to go to Labrie with Bern when I was in Europe the first time, but they weren't there or something like that, so we couldn't make it happen. Now, so you got to move back to Iowa. You got a mouth to feed.
Yeah,
and so
and Roger.
Now, classic story of academic, loves the mind, but you know what? Gotta put shoes. Baby needs a new pair of shoes. So you're driving Amazon trucks and
So I taught at Dordt for a year to fill in for Roger, but that was just a 1-year fill-in thing. And then what am I supposed to do with my life? Oh, let's see. Let's look at the past. Oh, I know. I should start a coffee shop. So there's an old building on Highway 75. If anybody wants to, if you just go into YouTube and search for the Fruited Plain Cafe, Iowa, I've been on like a public television show. Like you can get a sort of flavor of a well-produced flavor of what the Fruited Plain is.
CW, what do you think he taught at Dordt?
I taught philosophy at Dordt, of course.
Have you not been paying attention? CW, this whole podcast is because of you. Can't you follow this? Can't you follow the story?
I did teach some political theory, and I taught some other stuff at Dordt as well, but mostly philosophy. Again, so now I'm doing the coffee shop thing. We opened in 2010. So fast forward, now suddenly, the next guy, I was like, I was just the backup. And that's kind of what I've been at Dordt. The next guy takes a sabbatical. We need somebody to come in and teach philosophy. All right, Laremy, why don't you come on board? Okay,
He's
I'll
the
teach
pinch
philosophy.
hitter.
Yeah, I am the pinch hitter.
Philosophy.
Yeah. They keep calling for the lefty, I guess. And so that's kind of just been the weird, teeter-totter of the past 4 years of my life. I've been teaching about 50% at Dordt. And then, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm lecturing in front of 45 students. Usually it's an intro to philosophy, the same kind of worldview. Like we still talk about worldview in the, again, older sense. Worldview is kind of a popular word right now, but like Calvinism, we want to say, no, we invented that word. You don't get to claim worldview.
Don't look at John MacArthur.
No.
Don't look at Michael Horton.
No. You got to look at Abraham Kuyper, right? Calvinism is a life system. Look at Al Walters and look at Brian Walsh and Richard Middleton. Like that's how you understand developing your Christian worldview. So that's kind of, I do that. Yeah, I mean, like I think this is probably true of most universities in America. Like philosophy isn't super popular right now, as far as like a major. I mean, certainly at a place like Dordt, this is another part of our version of Calvinism. It is kind of pragmatic. So Dordt, there's a lot of like pre-professional things: engineering, business, nursing, education. Those are the biggest fields of study at Dordt, but we still want those people to have this reformed reformational worldview grounding. So requiring a philosophy class is, it's just kind of, we keep doing that. And I think it's really good. But yeah.
So you first find Burn Power because he's
because he's got these constant Rookmacher lectures.
He got, I think, Rookmacher's widow to give him permission to mine all those Labrie tapes and, put them on his channel. So you find Burn, and then somehow you found me, and you did, the Christian Reform dude is on YouTube. What's up with this?
Actually, I had heard about you. Again, Burn talked about you a lot. I think I dabbled in you, but it was bum, bum, bum. Again, I am a walking cliche. Synod 2023 that made me want to be like, oh, I need to start paying attention to this guy. This is really fascinating.
It wasn't Jordan Peterson, huh?
No, no, it wasn't. No. And I don't know what to say about Jordan Peterson. There's a lot of, I understand that a lot of people dislike Jordan Peterson. I treat Jordan Peterson the way that I treat a lot of other people, which is to say, he's got a point. And there are oftentimes, whatever, I can still criticize.
Sounds like Minnesota nice. What do you think? What do you think of me now? Well, you've got a point. Wait a minute. I remember those 2 points. Either everyone's wrong or you got a point. So that's sort of Iowa nice here.
Yeah, for sure.
You've got a point.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you watched 20. Okay. So now's the time where, before we allow questions, which you ought to be. See, the reason I decided to have you on in a live stream is because you run a coffee shop.
Absolutely.
And you've taught philosophy.
Yeah.
So I can just imagine what it's like in your coffee shop. And then when Nate mentioned in the comments, oh, I think I stopped in there, I thought, yeah, this is very much a TLC guy, because come into a coffee shop and there's the barista, and oh, by the way, he went to the Netherlands to study philosophy and he's going to talk worldview. And it doesn't matter how crazy you are, he'll find that you've got a point. He'll find one point that he can validate. And, so I thought, you'll fit right in here. So,
all right.
So, okay. So what's wrong with PVK? Let's have at it.
Oh, what's wrong with PVK?
I do have a point. I'm glad I have at least one, but you can pass over that.
No, I don't want to. Okay. I don't know how far to go back. Let's talk about actually one of our first internet interactions. You remember that Four Turnings video that I sent you?
Oh yeah. That was interesting.
That was interesting, right? I mean, that's the
I
same
thought they
way.
had a point.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. But I sort of thought, oh, you sort of sloughed it off and kind of played it off a little bit. But then as you keep talking about like the meaning crisis and meta, now we're talking about meta crises. I'm like, oh, this sort of, that model of those generational turnings does fit, right? It kind of fits with the meta crises that we are seeing. We have a very low trust in institutions. We have, I mean, just his way of explaining institutional faith, institutional building, like when institutional faith low, you know.
So we're in a turning.
We're in a turning,
That's
you know.
that's it. That's that dude's shtick.
Yeah. And again, I'm not part of his school of thought, but I think like, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at what's happening here.
Well, you found your way to Voices, which I thought was interesting.
Well, again, this was said,
and you're still there, which is
you know,
really interesting.
Oh Lord, that I try. I mean, that is a time suck if ever there was a time. Like, it will draw you. It's a black hole.
Even worse than the TLC.
Yeah,
it really is.
And it's just like anyway. So I really try to keep my mouth shut as much as I can, but every once in a while I just have to burst forth with my non-dual Kuiperian Dooyeweerdian way. That's the same sort of thing. You guys are a bunch of dualists. What's wrong with you? Yeah.
I will drop the link to CRC Voices into the chat.
Okay.
Oh, because CW found his way there. Nate found his way there. Most don't stick because it is people sometimes wonder how I can manage to juggle so many things at once. It's because you learn that if you're actually managed to be active on Voices, because that is a hole that can suck you in.
You absolutely cannot respond to everything that you think is interesting. You can't even read. Like, most of the time, I don't even look at I just delete them. Right? I delete the emails. I don't even want to know.
Oh,
every once in a while.
Here is the mother of Voices herself.
There we go.
Dawn Waltice, the great creator.
Also a former Dordt professor. Her and her husband, Tom, were at Dordt for a long time, especially right around the time that I was at Dordt. So I know Tom and Dawn well. I mean, she's speaking about TPing, like, she's the one who likes to lob the toilet paper onto everybody else's trees.
The donk wants to bring her on the channel. It's like, I don't know if my channel can survive Dawn.
Yeah.
I'm willing to talk to randos on the internet, but
sure.
Dawn, and that is unfair to Dawn, because if you meet her in person, she's
absolutely
lovely and delightful. But
on
Voices, she's quite a force. So shoot, I lost my thing here. So I am going to put the link in the for people to come on and join the conversation.
All right.
So get ready for that. I think Grim Grizz was a little disappointed in what's wrong with PVK.
Oh,
you didn't come out.
No, I didn't get there.
Enough.
So my most recent thing that I think what's wrong with PVK is the language that you're using about authenticity and sincerity. I don't like the way that you're using those things. And as a good Dooyeweerdian, I want to tie them. As a good Dooyeweerdian, I want to tie them back to it's the nature versus freedom duality that all of modern or meta-modern or postmodern thought is sort of stuck in. Sincerity is like nature. I just have to live in the role that I'm given. Have you watched the Kansas City Kicker speech? You know what I'm talking about?
No, I've got no idea what you're talking about.
So your internet is deep but not wide?
Yes, my internet is not very wide. Rick, that's why I have Rick around here, because Rick introduced me to things.
All right. Well, anyway,
I've been here a number of Sundays, and my internet was just getting narrower. I'm siloed. So who's the City kicker?
He's a kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs. He gave a graduation speech at St. Benedictine College or something in Kansas, and just a very sincere, right? Very much of a traditionalist, going all the way he says a lot of crazy things that he has been panned for by, everybody.
I thought we had Donald Trump for that.
Well, but he went so far as to say traditional Latin mass. Like, that's how much of a sincerity person he wants to be. Like, go all the way back. The only mass is the traditional Latin mass. And if you're not down with TLM, what are you even doing? Like, as a graduate of this Catholic college, move to a community where you can have traditional Latin mass. Anyway, does he have a point? Oof, maybe not.
A guy who kicks balls for a living telling young men how to get a trad wife. See,
yes,
the ortho bros are so going to dunk on this guy because they're like, you don't drive 4 hours to liturgy. We do.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And also, I didn't say I'm a little bit of a unique Dooyeweerdian because I'm also kind of like a Heideggerian. Like, what I loved about Roy Clauser's let's see, Roy Clauser was saying, like, it's like not having an essence way of looking at things, or what's the Vervaeke way of talking about a non-substance ontology, right? Like, which I think ties in very well to Kuyper, Dooyeweerd, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that people like Pascal and Kierkegaard and Heidegger are also trying to get us outside of that substance ontology. Sorry, I'm looking at my window. I'm seeing my wife drive down the road with the hatchback of the car opening and wondering what is going on. That's all.
If you got to duck out,
I'm totally fine.
I'm sure people on deck here that can.
I'll ask her later. So I don't love the way you talk about sincerity and authenticity. I want authenticity to, and I know you're not trying to like just dump on authenticity, and like I appreciate that you're trying to have them be a little bit nuanced, but I think your labels are a little too narrow for my liking.
Well, we're continuing. I'm continuing to develop them, and if you pay the $7 for no wait, no ads, you can actually discover that we had quite. I'm
both Dutch and patient.
Oh, not him and Van Donk. Not gonna pony up for the no wait, no ads, and he'll have to wait for me and Clay Leibolt talking about Hans Georg Mueller. All right, I am letting these characters into the room. Including the Van Donk, who's probably going to have some things to say. But Michael was the first one in. So, Michael, you get first crack at our guest.
Oh, boy.
Okay. So this is, I'm very interested to hear what you say, because I ended up at PVK's channel by searching for Jordan Peterson and Francis Schaeffer. And then that got me to Burns' stuff and their conversation. And I had watched, his videos in like high school and then rediscovered it later on. And, so I got that thing very early on, like trying to harmonize Plato and Aristotle with the Bible and Christianity is not good. And like, I kind of got that. And then I was like, okay. And then, I don't know, that kind of stuck with me until the current day. And, so I know, because he kind of had like Dooyeweerd from Rookmacher, and how much of that stuff kind of filters through into Schaeffer's stuff correctly, I guess, or I don't know.
I am not a Schaeffer scholar by any means. I have read Francis Schaeffer. Actually, the Edith Schaeffer book about the history of L'Abri, again, this is sort of the person that I am, right? Like, the idea of creating a welcoming space where interesting things can happen and interesting conversations can happen. Like, that's probably my real deep down calling. So that Edith Schaeffer book in some ways was, as interesting. Like, I love all the, and again, the way that Francis Schaeffer sort of, did the Dooyeweerd thing, or did the Rookmacher thing, or did the Kuyper thing, or kind of introduce those people to this broader American, much more popular kind of a world. but you know, he got his hands dirty in interesting ways later in his life as well. Politics. Wait, we're not talking politics, are we?
Right.
All right.
Founding member of the religious right, Laremy, right?
Yeah, I know.
Jerry Falwell, right? How can you not talk politics?
I know, because I want to talk about the old Francis Schaeffer. You know, I want to talk about the Switzerland Francis Schaeffer or something. You know. Anyway, wow. So CW, I did actually listen to your rando of all the randos. And I was enthralled and fascinated. And I thought, oh, look, this guy, you know, he's got a ponytail. You know, he's got a Herman Dooyeweerd painting there. How good.
But what's going to happen here, Laramie? It's like this is the profound game of chicken. It's like, am I going to have to go to Iowa? Or are you going to slum it by coming up here to fly over country in Minneapolis? Like,
yeah, it's that I did not, you know, I'm often in Minneapolis. So.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, we should meet sometime.
All right, so High Tech Dale Addink, who has spent some time in the subculture.
Yeah, I grew up in Orange City.
I was going to say, with a name like Addink, you got to be from up here, right?
Hey, you said it right. My God,
yeah.
How does that work? I haven't heard my name pronounced right in 30 years.
Addink.
You said you lived in Pella at the moment?
No, I live in Sioux Center, Iowa right now.
Oh, you're back to Dordt country. Yeah, I grew up in Orange City.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, sister taught at Dordt back in like 79, 80. She taught there a while type thing. So where are you living in Sioux Center exactly now?
Do you want to know exactly?
Well, just give me which side of town. I mean,
if you go to Bethel Church on the highway and you go 1 block east of Bethel Church, you'll find my house.
Is that right behind Bethel Church?
Across
you know, we're on
highway.
the internet, people. This isn't like some rural potluck. You know?
across the highway.
Okay, I know where you are.
Right, so we're on the east side. We're on the good side of the tracks.
Past that old wheelbarrow that somebody left there and never moved.
It's 1 block from where my grandma lived. So what can I say?
This now, CW, you have to understand something about the Christian Farm Church right here.
Yes, this
right
is how
here.
we roll.
It is local.
Yes, hyper local. I mean,
yeah, very much. It's like it's you know I haven't been in the CRC forever, but I feel most at home if I can get back there. It's just they don't have CRCs in Dallas. So
Van Donk drove through Sioux Center once, so
I'm sure
he's got that. He's got that.
What year did you go to Dordt?
I went to Dordt. I started in '98. I graduated in '02.
Okay.
Do you have a nephew or something named like Ben Addink?
No, I'm not a Van Addink, but yeah.
No.
No.
Okay. All right.
There's Addinks around town yet.
Sure.
Not too many, but.
See, I can't help but feel like it's this incestuous insularity that is
you're
inhibiting the transmission of Dooyeweerd's thought. But
maybe
absolutely.
That's
just you missed the early growing up in the CRC because I was born in '60.
Okay.
And you got out of the no dancing age, beer was verboten, all that type of thing. So you missed all that.
There was not beer in my house when I was a kid. You know, we played Rook. So
absolutely. It's the only game you could play.
No face cards, but you could play Rook. Oh.
There's a reason you started a cafe, not a pub, right?
Well, I mean, the thing about the Fruited Plain is, and again, this is part of that, having that European experience. It was like, there's not a difference between coffee shops and bars in Europe, right? All the bars have espresso machines and serve great coffee. All the coffee shops have Heineken on tap. And so I mean, this was kind of revolutionary in the year 2010, but coffee shop, wine bar, you know, imported beer. So
now coffee shop has an even additional connotation.
Well, that's true. We're
but
still
it's a
in
true
Iowa.
Public house, you're saying?
Yes, it is a public house, but not not an Amsterdam style coffee shop. That's for sure.
All right, and John Van Donk. Dale used his time to talk addresses in the center. So what now? John's probably going to talk about dead fish. So let's go.
I can talk addresses in Den Haag.
Okay.
I was born there.
We lived closer to Ypenburg, like it was a development. You know that?
Rijswijk. You were in Rijswijk. I lived most of my life in Rijswijk.
Okay.
We had a little dairy where right up adjacent to Ypenburg. We had a little dairy. The cows were right up against the freeway that runs north of Ypenburg Airport.
Okay. Yeah, that was like an army training or an Air Force kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So whenever that got turned into housing, it was a relatively new housing development.
Right.
Yeah. So Weide Vogelaan, Zees en Zeventag. Okay, I still remember my address.
Yeah. So the reason why I am here is to
because it's free.
I paid.
You did pay. You $3.
I paid. So. Yeah, and it's a lot cheaper than the $7 for the monthly thing.
Yeah.
So I am mostly here because in the discussion that really should be happening right now, which is what is going on in the Christian Reformed Church and what world and life views might address that, and what culture and circulation system in the Christian Reformed Church might mitigate the crisis that we're up against. Dawn Wolthuis should have a voice on this channel. I don't really care what Paul Vanderklee says about that, whether he likes her or not.
I love Dawn.
She is profoundly intuitive about underlying currents, and this whole thing about the circulatory system is her wheelhouse. So
she's going to use the B word on me.
That doesn't matter.
It's not the B word everyone thinks it is. It's Dawn's B word that she drops on Voices all the time.
But the thing is that I contacted her by every way possible to get her to join this live stream right now, because that may well be the only way she's going to be admitted on your channel, Paul. So yeah, no, just in defense of Dawn, I think that she represents an aspect of the discussion related to cultural continuity. And there is something deeply profound about that has everything to do with Abraham Kuyper's influence in the Netherlands and his appreciation for the wider culture, and the way that we cannot be insularly Christian, even with our three forms of unity, if we cannot somehow appreciate the cultural connections that have been established over many years and that continue. And this whole conversation that you guys have been having just profoundly illustrates the depth of those connections, and that there is something profoundly beautiful about that and meaningful. And perhaps there is something there there's something there that speaks to continuity in the Christian community at large, the way Christians relate to one another in a familial sense.
I want to say, am I allowed to respond?
Yeah, by all means, please.
By all means, respond to Vendome.
All right. So I want to say, wait, Frisa Bapa, did I say that right? That's the only Frisian I know.
Yeah.
My grandfather was born in like Dumvouda or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm only a Frisian LARPer. I'm a Frisian LARP.
Okay, well that's
because
good.
I do Frisianize this on Voices every Friday, and you might have read my little thing today.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not trying to make any particular claim to Frisians, except that they are a subculture in the Christian community.
Okay.
You're not supposed to speak in tongues without someone giving an interpretation.
It's not a dead language. So here's the thing: that this is again only a thing that happens in the CRC. Both of my parents had the last name De Vries before they were married, but they were actually more familial tree related on their mother's sides. So that's,
like I said, it's incestuous.
It is. It absolutely is.
And I have two families in my sphere of influence that are three brothers married to three sisters, all of which are De Vries.
Mooi.
The dirty little
secrets. You know, at Wheaton, they don't allow Wheaton grads to teach back at Wheaton, but at Dordt, it is the kind of expectation. Again, there is a kind of, you can call it intellectual incest if you want. And
is it because Dordt graduates can't get a job anywhere else?
Maybe. I find myself I was gonna say misschien, like somehow listening to you, John, makes me want to speak the little bit of Dutch that I know. Let me make a.
Ik kan u volkomen verstaan. Ik heb helemaal geen probleem met Nederlands.
Let me try to make a real point.
It's exactly what I imagined, Paul. You're doing a great job. This is exactly what
this should have been. If I could get this look from Paul, that should have been my goal.
This is CW's dream to destroy my channel. He is the supervision villain Grim Grizz has always said he is.
I want to make a quick point though. I believe that, and again, this is a kind of, I think I was brought up in or sort of taught maybe a kinder, gentler kind of Kuyperianism. The idea of public justice, right? The Center for Public Justice. It's not one that it celebrates pluralism, right? The idea of principled pluralism. These are the kinds of 80s and 90s kind of Kuyperianism, Dooyeweerdianism that sort of develops. And I think it goes back to that Kuyper tradition of this idea of a third way. There's always a third way. An interesting thing about Abraham Kuyper starting the Anti-Revolutionary Party, this was the first Christian political party that existed in Europe. So like Angela Merkel exists because Abraham Kuyper existed, yes, and created a whole idea that there could be these multiple political parties that all could sort of vie for space in the public sphere.
You might be leaving Van Prinster out of that whole thing.
Sure. I appreciate.
I don't care about that.
I appreciate, Groen. I appreciate. I was reading something that was really interesting about that. The way that developed in that pre-Kuyperian way. Kuyper, not the inventor. Kuyper, the hammer that broke the rock, or something like that, or like the final blow, maybe, or the straw, whatever. But it's always been that third way pluralism that has, and again, looking at the way that Dooyeweerd looked at ground motives, the way that people look at dualism, the only way to be non-dual is to be triangular. I get there has to be this third way approach to things, which is why I personally am I always hesitate to make strong positions, but I'll make this as a strong position.
What is the internet for?
Well, I know, but this is what makes me a better together person. I appreciate the better together movement because
just took a strong position there, Larry.
I know, because it is
that's very strong.
It is a third way kind of a movement that says we don't have to use this one particular little thing as a way of looking at things, but also let's have a real broader connection that is, dare I say, multimodal, multi-aspectual. How does biology and family trees fit into the CRC? You can't ignore that. You can't say a church does not exist in this kind of a sphere, because it absolutely does. And so when the people are like, what about my kids? Geez, I mean, my oldest daughter is going to be 16 this summer, but I have the same kind of a question. What about my kids? And yeah, so there. I wanted to get serious for a minute. And
I invited you to, so thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Van Dordt, always there to take the credit. I invited you to. So.
CW, we're going to go to that coffee shop together.
No herring, okay?
No, they don't have good herring in Iowa.
No, for sure not. For sure not.
I'm sure you bring it.
Ours comes in a jar, and it's just not good.
Zuurharding.
Yeah.
Gross.
All right, I'm going to give Steve a question, and then CW. You got a question, Steve?
Maybe more just a comment, I guess, at this point. But it seems like CRC is sort of like. Oh yeah, hello. It's the way you notice my last name. I'm not Dutch, and so an outsider to the CRC, I've been watching your discussions about sort of the political takeover attempts of the CRC, and then just hearing your discussion right now, it sounds like what people describe as, like, let's say, the Greek Orthodox Church where I grew up. They have a Greek food festival and stuff like that, and it's Christianity, but it's very ethnic. And I'm wondering how ethnically different a CRC church would be for someone like myself, an Ulster Scot, that's like, probably half of my distant relatives check the Native American box in their census forms because they think they're American, not because they think they have any type of Hopi or Aztec ancestry.
Unadulterated American, right?
And somebody had posted earlier in here, how interesting it would be to have an affinity or a connection to a deep cultural heritage. And I'm totally divorced, at least since sermons marched through Atlanta. I've been cut off from whatever I was connected to in the past. But to have not only a American flag, Pledge of Allegiance. I used to say Hail Mary at Catholic school, and going to Sunday school as a kid. A kind of connection to Christianity, but to have something so deep that it's even my culture. Because I went to a Presbyterian church as a kid, which is theoretically a Scottish type of connection. But my ancestors rejected Scotland and rejected Ireland and ended up in Pennsylvania and rejected Pennsylvania and then moved out west. And then there's it's like no cultural connection to Christianity.
Well, Steve, Paul on any given Sunday will have in his sermon a slide with a Tom Holland book cover that speaks to that question.
Dominion. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, Laremy.
Well,
so
I just think it's interesting. I wonder what that would be like, especially, I was an atheist. I called myself one for years. And I wonder what that would have been like if I had like a teary-eyed grandmother looking at me like, you're rejecting our line, you're rejecting who we are. That's not how it went for me. And so it's just interesting to observe that. And
all right,
because I'm coming back to the faith, and I'm still don't know, like, where am I going to land? How is it going to be?
So what do you say, Laramie, about the whole ethnicity, religion? Because I mean, we started out talking. This is deep CRC, Dutch immigrant ethnicity.
But that's not what Steve's comment is about. That is not what it is about. It is there a cultural manifestation of our Christian belief system? And it happens to be particular in the Christian Reformed Church. But Steve is asking for the more generic form of it. What is the cultural expression of religious faith, of Christian religious faith?
Let me go. I'm going to make one quick comment. What's his name? Oh boy, it's escaping me. Mark Charles. Maybe you guys know Mark Charles. His dad was like a big Rehoboth guy.
None of them know Mark Charles.
Okay. You're not CRC enough to know who Mark Charles is?
I know who he is.
I heard him speaking Calvin, for crying out loud. He's been at Dordt too. He is exploring, again, native cultural expressions of Christianity. And I think we've kind of, hopefully as a culture, and I think certainly as, I'll just say this for myself, we've moved beyond the you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, to a place where we can say, a story that Mark Charles likes to tell is, at Pentecost, God could have made it. He could have done a miracle where everybody understood what Peter was saying. They all understand Aramaic. That would be great. But he did this other miracle, which, it seems like a higher level of difficulty, which is to change the sound waves in midair and have them hit their ears in their own native tongues, as if to say, all of these cultural expressions, the gospel, there is no one. I mean, talk about the traditional Latin mass. There is no one language which encapsulates God's revelation, and it encapsulates our good possibilities of living out responses to God's calling. Culture is a part of it, and it's a cool part of it. Somebody once was telling me a story about, in LA, people don't think they have culture. They don't think that they are they just think culture is for other people, and they're just, I don't know.
There's the real urban monoculture, Paul.
Sure, but it's just whatever. But here, it's interesting in a place like Sioux Center. Obviously, we have a growing Hispanic population, farm workers. We're now they used to be Mexicans. Now there's more like Guatemalans and other sort of Hispanic subcultures. But I think having a kind of like an appreciation for a culture maybe makes us a little bit more connected to those people and welcoming, if that makes sense.
Are you adding drinks to the menu in the coffee shop?
What do you mean by that?
For those other cultures?
How do you call?
No, but we
should.
are, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like to be an American or a Euro style coffee shop, we have Hispanic customers who want to come and have a Euro style.
Yeah, they love conforming to the Euro.
Well,
John Van Dock. Come on.
They love our symbols they love our coffee.
It's a cross-cultural experience for them.
It absolutely is. It's not a joke. Just like I love the fact that I wouldn't want them to have, chicken strips on the menu at their Mexican place. I want to go have a real, burrito.
Fair point. I'll concede the point.
Vendonk storms out of the taqueria because they got no hotting.
Yeah.
It's a taqueria.
So, Steve, it's probably something I take for granted, but it is a somewhat unique cultural reality. It makes things easier to sort of like name and connect. But then it makes it more complicated. Like, what is our church based on? What is a church? Is a church just a bunch of people who adhere to this particular interpretation of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Unchastity? Or is it something bigger?
Yeah, like any doubt that I have, it's not a doubt of who I am. As far as like my father, like I'm not like I can get mad at him for all sorts of different reasons, but like if it's like I doubt, like how can I believe in a supernatural claim or whatever the truth claim is, the phrase people use. How could I doubt, or if I'm doubting a truth claim, am I doubting my heritage as well?
Sure.
And in my case, it's like completely divorced from that. It's independent of it. So I don't know what that would be like to not live in a family where you could have different denominations in the same like nuclear family. And it might be a little bickering if you happen to be like a YouTuber or a Redditor, but if you're not, the topics never even come up.
My parents go to the URC now. And when they started going to the URC, my grandma looked at me as like, just us left. And so that's
the URC is the United Reformed, a break off of the Christian Reformed Church, a conservative break off. All right, I got a couple of questions I want to get to.
Okay, sorry.
Were asked. Does Laramie regret skipping out on the Institute of Christian Studies in Toronto?
No. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the ICS.
If it's between that and the VU, I mean,
I know for sure. Like, forget about it. But I mean, I would, I'm still, I don't know. I am. I'm 44 years old. I have a leg in two careers. I like it that way. But if ever I really get my hand forced, like doing further studying at the ICS, I know several people who teach there, like I would be fascinated by it. So I'm not anti-ICS.
He's not above taking a highly paid tenured position there if they want to offer, I mean.
My problem is I only have a master's degree. So I'm not really, I'm not really a full on get to be in this academic world. Yeah.
You'd have to spend more money to make less money.
Exactly.
And those will be Canadian dollars too. So what's up with that?
For sure, for sure. I coach my kids' hockey team, so that gets me close enough to the to Toronto.
All right.
And I know how to say Toronto and not Toronto, so that's good, right?
All right. Okay. Tayo wants to know, can we get Laramie's commentary on CRC Synod 2024 to provide the better together perspective?
Since you love taking strong positions on the internet,
I know.
there, I mean,
It's look,
opportunity.
We live in a very dangerous time to be in the CRC, right? Like, at the end of the day, but this is why I like Better Together. I take Paul's, not Vanderklay, I mean, the apostle, exhortation to submit yourselves to one another. I take that very seriously. And so I try to, maintain the ability to say, look, I do submit to a belief structure, but to wholeheartedly, like all the words that when they're trying to like patrol my belief system or my belief system in my heart, to use Roy Clauser's words, that just gets it's just dangerous, right? It's all very dangerous. I teach at a very conservative institution, and I live in a very conservative town. And call it Dutch pragmatism. It's the businessman inside of me too, though. Like, part of running a public house in a small place means you have to welcome the stranger. I take that very seriously as well. You have to welcome everybody. You can't make enemies. And you might say it's negative, but it's a kind of pragmatism that has kind of rubbed off on me. And so I would be happy to comment. I would be happy to do so in a guarded way.
Here's a question about this specific topic: is how can you welcome the stranger without becoming the stranger? Like, what's an example of a stance where it's not the you be you, which was another thing I was listening to this morning. It's more like, and it's not you're going to burn in hell with meat hooks in your back and stuff like that because of the way you're acting. So you don't have to condemn, but you don't have to accept, but you can what's the proper stance of that? I haven't spent enough hours reading through the gospel to get a clear sense of that. But it just seems like if you don't drape yourself in a rainbow flag, you're a sinner. And if you don't hold up a sign saying, these people are bad, you're a sinner. But there's obviously the right way. I was about to say the middle way, but it's actually the right way, because the example in the gospel was never, as far as I can see, to condemn people as sinners or to completely throw out your values. So what's a good example? Is there a movie or a story or an example of somebody who does it right?
Steve, I mean, it's always the low blow with the fucking rainbow flag, isn't it? Well, I think we have at least 2, maybe 3 examples of what.
How about 20 years ago? It was an American flag, and what they were talking about is bombing.
No, look,
I am. But I think we have 2 examples of it right here, right? We've got Nate Heil and John Van Donk, and they're like the consummate insider outsiders.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And anyway, it's also a matter of fact that if Laramie festooned his coffee shop with rainbow flags in the community he's in, that's a very different thing than festooning
Target.
doing it in Sacramento. So
and yet,
go ahead, Nate.
Having been to Laramie's coffee shop, and Laramie, we actually met briefly. I actually shook your hand and said hi to you and your wife in church.
Okay.
I met Joel too.
Okay.
You probably won't recognize me. Let me turn off my camera for a second so you can see what I look like in 2020 when I was there. So that was me in 2020.
Yeah, we expect you to have encyclopedic photographic knowledge of everyone who's been through your coffee shop,
Yes.
Laremy.
No. I actually didn't meet him in the coffee shop. I met him in church.
Oh,
I met him at his church, and his wife, who I did meet in the coffee shop.
Yes.
Uh-oh. Did Nate freeze?
That's where, like,
Yeah.
because
Well, let me just. This is okay. Is he going?
Laramie's coffee shop in Sioux Center feels like a little piece of the Pacific Northwest. So it's kind of like, here I am on vacation and I can go to this place that feels like home. And one of the things that we did at that coffee shop while we were there is that we attended an anti-Trump rally that was on the premises. So yeah. And that's it. I love your coffee shop. Is an amazing place. Anybody goes to Sioux Center should 100% visit it. And I the part of this conversation I've been able to listen to, I've been having to drop in and out of. I've had work meetings in between that I've had to drop in and out of. I would love to have you on Grill Country sometime because I think you're really fascinating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
See, this is opening these gates to this internet world, a YouTube world that I don't really.
I am the gateway to the TLC. That's.
I'm not inviting you onto my channel, Laremy, or anybody else for that matter.
This is the surreal thing, though, Laremy, is because really the thing that led me to this corner of the internet was my real world interactions when I was in Sioux Center in Orange City working as a volunteer for the Yank campaign. Because I'd never heard of the CRC. You don't have to listen to Grill Country for very long to figure out that my theology is quite different from Reformed theology. And so I had no idea how amazing you Calvinists could be when you
Until
actually
you met
encountered in the flesh. I met Pastor Joel. I met
He's
so
part of
many
the Yang
amazing
Gang.
people. I like just the people were amazed. The people were amazing, and I fell in love with the place. And yeah, this whole thing has made me realize that I need to go back again someday.
All right.
You can go back
You are
with
welcome.
John and CW.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we go with the three of us, guys? We need to organize a road trip.
Where is the
I think it'd be
estuary
awesome.
in your coffee shop, Laramie? Where is the estuary?
You know, actually, Trevor Mao, another CRC Voices.
He's on Voices?
I was going to use the word denizen, but I don't know. That might be too strong. I like Trevor. Trevor is a guy. He and I actually talked about starting an estuary. But you know what? I honestly, you can maybe. I feel like the Fruited Plain already just is an estuary, and like it's the kind of thing that. Yeah, I love the sort of theory of it, but I'm also. You can probably hear from this. I'm way too busy. I have 3 children.
Your
3
wife
children
is driving down the road with a hatch open.
Exactly. Two jobs, and and I play guitar in church, and so it just isn't something that I would have the time to feed and water on a regular basis. But if somebody else wanted
Trevor
to,
should.
Yeah,
all right,
he should. It'd be great.
We have to give CW some time here.
Okay.
Because we have CW to thank for all of this. So,
but now you pissed me off, Paul. So,
oh boy,
well,
here we go again.
Here we are.
By the way, CW, I love the fact that you have Kierkegaard and Dooyeweerd behind. Like when I was watching you on the randos. So Charlie Adams, is that a name you know? You ever heard of him? Dordt engineering prof, but he big Dooyeweerdian, and he always said.
So I know Douglas, but
De Boer. Yeah, well,
Voices.
Adams always said he's dead now, unfortunately, but he said you can't read Dooyeweerd without reading Kierkegaard, and you can't read Kierkegaard without reading Dooyeweerd. And I just thought that was a very fascinating. And then I saw that you have them as the you should really pause it. You turn your camera so they're the angel and the devil on each of your shoulders. It would.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, now you're derailing my little.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
Anti-Paul screed. We'll put a pin in that because I'd like to.
Laramie didn't get after me to Grim Grizz's satisfaction.
Yeah.
So CW is here to.
Well, he's not going to like the way that I go after you, but that's whatever. Anyway, so apparently Paul saw my attempt to humanize this whole thing by calling out the insider-outsider nature of John Van Donk as Nate, and Nate as some kind of non sequitur. because he's like, okay, whatever. And then he goes back to the fucking draped in the rainbow flag thing. Well, let me say something. Just shut up for a second. Just shut up for a second.
Yeah.
I believe I'm the only person in this panel who actually unironically identifies as LGBTQIA. But who's more likely to bring it up? Who's more likely to bring it up? It's not me, fucking Paul Vanderklay. So when we talk about draping in the... Anyway, that's just something that irks me, okay? Like being in this space. Because the space is chronically conservative, I would say. But
which space, CW?
TLC, the Vanderverse or whatever the fuck they want to... Whatever we want to call it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So,
All right.
there we are.
Yeah,
you
but
left.
Laremy, so now I'll get to things that I actually want to talk about because I'm not one to jam rainbow colored cupcakes down people's throats, actually. But interesting how our detractors seem to love to call attention to all of that, almost maybe more than we do, or at least maybe more than this asexual is inclined to, right? Okay, fair enough. But so Dooyeweerdian and Kierkegaard. So I actually see my own Christianity, Laramie, as a kind of hyper-Protestantism. And I say that because it's equally informed by these two thinkers. I see Herman Dooyeweerd as the intellectual heir to John Calvin, and I see Søren Kierkegaard as the spiritual successor to Martin Luther. And so my own sort of approach to Christian life and thought is very much an amalgam of the two of them. And it's not a synthesis because, of course, in Kierkegaard, you have this kind of inauguration of the existential line in Christian thought. And so, I was very intrigued to see that I know Garrett Glass there has written a little bit about convergences.
Actually, I have that in my bag over there. It's on my reading list.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. So maybe we get with Paul and see if you can hook me up with the writings of that other guy, because I'm intrigued to hear him making that connection as well. I also love Richard Kroner, because for me, he kind of occupies very much that liminal space that's implied between Dooyeweerd and Kierkegaard. He sees himself between faith and thought. He was deeply influenced by Kierkegaard, and he was aware of Dooyeweerd, but didn't engage as much, although he wrote some reviews of him. Actually, like in the first volume of his magisterial 3-volume treatment of Western thought from a Christian perspective, he actually criticizes Dooyeweerd's view of the Greek religious ground motive. And that's, I think, a part where I'm kind of a very idiosyncratic Dooyeweerd enthusiast. Sure. So I actually think that part of him is the weakest part, the part that leads to the polemical tradition, like a la Van Til et al., like the dualism thing. So I think it's intriguing as a kind of identification of themes in intellectual history and the tendency to engage in kind of dialectical opposition, right? However, I think it profoundly undermines the utility of his philosophical program if we take the religious ground motive as Dooyeweerd laid it out. Because for Dooyeweerd, he identifies all these ground motives, as in the history of Western thought. And, lo and behold, they're all self-defeating dualisms except for the Christian one, right? And I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses in Dooyeweerd, actually, is that he succumbed to the temptation to articulate what on his own account was supposed to be a radically philosophical approach. He succumbed to the temptation to articulate in such a way that defined his intellectual opponents as necessarily wrong.
Yeah.
And I followed Dooyeweerd in that aspiration to a more critical philosophical approach. And I agree with him that is uniquely, I believe, possible on the basis of Christian convictions and commitments. And with you, I think and Kierkegaard, I think those commitments are of an existential nature. They're existential convictions and commitments. But I wonder so maybe we'll throw this out to the panel here because I want to fucking monopolize Paul's show or whatever. But I think that Dooyeweerdian's articulation of the Christian religious ground motives needs to be revised. Because just let me say what it fucking is first, okay? Let me just complete my fucking thought, okay? I think it needs. Okay, thank you. I think it needs to be revised because the whole point for Dooyeweerd of the religious ground motive is it's supposed to be the pre-theoretical originating and animating force behind thought of any kind, including theological thought.
Well, or philosophical thought.
Yes, of any kind. Therefore, I think it's embarrassing that Dooyeweerd coincidentally articulates the Christian religious ground motive as, the traditional Dutch Reformed summation of Scripture. Creation, fall, redemption. Oh, there's no theology here. No theology here, right? And Van Til, God love him, he was the fucking prime example of somebody who confused Christianity with Reformed theology. As great a thinker and as brilliant as he was absolutely wrong about that. So since we have Nate Heil, Steve, Nathan Woods here, if we care about ecumenism at all as reformational scholars, I wonder what they believe about the idea that we could perhaps do better in articulating the Christian religious ground motive than just, reflexively reiterating Reformed theology.
All right, CW.
So my proposal, Paul, for the Christian religious ground motive is something like this, and then I'll shut up. Something like this. The living creator God, who is love, personified in the historical Jesus Christ. Please, go ahead.
First of all, one of my beefs, and I agree with you, one of my beefs with this whole tradition, and a thing that I would love, again, if I take a more scholarly route in my life, I would love to go back to, ancient Israel. Like, people like to pretend, there's this guy, what's his name? Yoram Hazony or something like that. People like to pretend that Israel was just religious and Greek was just philosophical, right? Anaximander or whoever you want to imagine, Thales, those are the guys that invented philosophy, but the Bible is really religion. And anybody with a half a brain is like, oh, Ecclesiastes, meaningless, everything. Like, that's just religion. Like, there is political theory. There are things that come in the Old Testament. And for people like Kuyper and Calvin, for people like Kuyper, at least Kuyper pretended to kind of give a Hegelian historical building. This is why, the March of Truth happened to show up in Geneva and then in Amsterdam and Scotland and America. Dooyeweerd doesn't really do that. But I would love to, where do we keep following the headwaters back into, I don't know what he's doing there, but.
Polis, the Jerusalem Institute of Language and Humanities. You might be interested in them.
Oh, okay. Going back far enough, to find some of those philosophical roots. That's a very interesting question. So it doesn't just like, oh, look what I found. Turns out that the things that I like are the best things ever. The second point I want to make, I have two. If anybody actually wants to read Dooyeweerd, Reading in the Twilight of Western Thought is probably the best primer. I think this was probably the lectures that Roy Clauser went to in Philadelphia. I have two copies of this. My 1970s copy has a foreword by Rushdoni, who is the famous, what did they call those people?
Reconstructionist.
Deuteronomy or some.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of the real
theonomy.
Yeah. The real roots of Christian nationalism and, Buddy in Moscow, Idaho, or whatever. My second, more modern copy, the foreword is by James K.A. Smith, and he describes Dooyeweer there as a proto-postmodern. So sort of saying, again, entering into the fray of what we might describe as critical theory, he's a part of that. And actually, you can think about the modal scale as a sort of, well, this is the way to do critical theory. You can look at anything from the perspective of biology. You can look at anything through the perspective of race, of money, of history, of art, like all of these things.
Or a slogan for the non-philosophers, an anti-reductionist.
Absolutely.
Approach.
But
the ultimate intersectionality.
Exactly, which is the kind of postmodern language. So, Dooyeweer, he does fit into this interesting place. And yeah, people like Ventil put him in their sniper rifle and use his ideas to just shoot people. That's not the kind of, that's the everybody's wrong kind of Dooyeweerdian that I don't want to be. I want to be the everybody's right. How can we explore and learn?
Yeah, you want to be the Andrew Basden, listen, affirm, critique, enrich, lace kind of Dooyeweerdian.
Sure, yeah. Or Rudy Hayward is a Dooyeweerdian that I like a lot too. Sorry?
We're all struggling with the Evan Runner legacy. There was only one right way and everything else was wrong.
Well, I gotta play one more little bit of Dutch bingo for people. Speaking of Runner, Nick Waltersdorf is my father-in-law's cousin via marriage, right? So Nick Waltersdorf's mother died when he was quite young, and his father married my father-in-law's aunt. So I have hung out with Nick Waltersdorf, at my in-laws' house, having wine and cheese.
Wow, that you married up, didn't you?
I did, absolutely.
You got like Reformed epistemology royalty in addition to CRC
Yeah,
royalty. Wow.
I know, right?
All right. Now, poor Nate has been here
All right.
the whole time and has had, and my poor dog's going to have to get out of this kennel at some point too. So, Nate, what do you have for us? I'm gonna be
right. Primarily, I just wanted to come on and say hi to Laremy, but this is fascinating. I'll tell you, I don't know Dooyeweerd at all, so I can't speak to it. But I did listen to most of your conversation with Roy, and the thing that I would want to poke at is the idea that Platonism is completely irreconcilable. Because that flies in the face of like the history of most of like Christian theological writing. Here's the thing that I want to acknowledge. Platonism does break down, but it breaks down there's a particular thing. The Platonic participation breaks down at a particular place. It doesn't just break down generally. Platonic participation breaks down specifically when it attempts to explain the incarnation. That doesn't mean that it's therefore useless as a tool in Christian theology.
I think it's almost impossible to understand Christian theology without seeing at least the Platonic influence, right?
I think Roy Clauser would be an excellent guest on Grail Country if poor Roy doesn't get overwhelmed by the nature of this crazy stuff we're doing.
These internet people. Yeah.
If turn the comments off,
if he gets injured, CW, in the process of this, I'm holding you responsible. Poor man has made it all these decades, and you bring him here, and we overwhelm him. So you've got to keep an eye and help him along. That's your job.
You're the one who said he was spry, and I was depicting him as on the verge of death, and now suddenly it's some shrinking violet. What the fuck is this? Pick a lane, Paul. Pick a lane.
All right. Nathan Woods, the lovely Nathan Woods, one of the true OGs here. Nathan, please bring sanity to this place.
I have a practical question for the CRC folks. I'll just, if you give me a minute or two to set it up, kind of bring it down to a more on the ground level, if you'll allow me. So some quick context. I am a recent convert, an orthobro, if you will, to the Orthodox Church. I was baptized in 2020, and
congratulations.
I am in central Pennsylvania, and the parish that I go to, it was founded by primarily Lebanese immigrants. The church has been here for about 100 years, almost exactly 100 years. We're having our 100-year anniversary in September. So all that to say, with the recent influx of Orthodox into the church in the last couple of decades, my parish currently is about 50-50 converts, and then you have the older families that had established the church. I actually was kind of taken in by our choir director, a lovely older woman whose family has like been here from the beginning. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've been corralled into the parish council, and I'm one of the handful of converts. And my question for the CRC folk is if you have any practical advice for me as to how to best conduct myself, assuming that you have also dealt with annoying converts who are outside of.
And they wish they had that problem, Nathan Woods. They wish they had that problem.
But you know what I mean. I
know exactly what you mean, and it is a I mean, CW was mocking me earlier because I said we're past you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, but at the same time, so the university that I work at, we can't just hire CRC people. There are so we have to. There's a kind of like bringing in, but what I'm trying to say is it makes Sioux Center more diverse than, Orange City or something. Well, no, Orange City also has its own, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So our CRCs do have a lot of non-Dutch people. Some of those non-Dutch people are maybe, I would say, misunderstanding the ways that we think about this balance between history and an interpretation, a right now interpretation. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean confessional history, or maybe that's the thing, history versus confession. I have heard people make comments about, it's all the people that don't have Dutch last names that are kind of building up a sort of a mistrust, whereas the kind of old family people are kind of more like, at least at a super local level, why can't we all just get along? Like, why do we have to fuss about all this stuff?
Yeah, the cabal, you're saying that.
Sure. I mean, it's a real and interesting dynamic in the Christian Reformed Church that doesn't have an easy answer. Because again, it's all true. Like, confessional status is important and true. Family connections are important and true. Dutch bingo is important and true. Welcoming somebody else in from an outside position is important and true. Trying to figure out Koreans, that's important and true. Like, so
how is it that my daughter now has a Mexican last name?
Yeah, that's great. So I don't know, Nathan. I mean, I would love to say like, well, just sit and watch and wait. And, but that's not good either. You can't just be a sort of anti-historical, MAGA, make the Orthodox Church great again, make the CRC great again, sort of. You can't pretend history doesn't happen and there's not development. Like, there should be some development, even within the Orthodox Church.
Well, I will tell you, Nathan, that my entire life has revolved around this question.
Absolutely.
I mean, my father's church, it would be easier for your Lebanese hosts if the vast majority of the people in their church were from a different culture. For example, all of the African Americans in Northside Chapel. This whole, I mean, the burning the wooden shoes, part of the reason I keep bringing this up is that the denomination as such thought it could sort of, okay, we're going to shed this Dutchness, but they had absolutely no idea what was Dutch and what wasn't, because they were just Dutch.
Was it an onion, not a peach pit, Paul?
It was a very integrated onion. And so basically what you do together is work it through. So at this church, before I got here, there was an uproar, and they decided to no longer sing. I can't say it right because I. There you go. That became a sort of that became sort of a fight here years before I got here. I had never even heard the song because I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, in a church that wasn't hardly Dutch at all. So this sort of gets back to Steve's question he asked earlier, which is you cannot incarnate without embodying, and you cannot embody without a culture. And there is always going to be, and this is where probably some Dooyeweerdianism and Kuiperianism deep within me recognizes that there will always be a sifting. And in every culture, God has sort of placed jewels and gems. And in every human culture, there's some stuff that should be gotten rid of. And so it's amazing to me that you found a community that has sort of, like the CRC, managed to maintain an immigrant ethnic monoculture. Yeah. Because the part of the interesting thing was, of course, if you look at John Van Donk's story, John Van Donk is not a stereotypical Dutch immigrant to the CRC. He came too late. So when he met Dutch people, he was meeting Dutch people from a culture that had been extinct in the Netherlands already. And so you wind up.
I can't even tell you how many Dutch people I've had to introduce to Dooyeweerd, Paul.
Yeah, well, exactly. And part of where this conversation got started is you can go to places in Iowa, in Minnesota, in Canada. You can go to places that are, on one hand, Laremy and I can go and it'd be like, oh, wow, I remember this. On the other hand, that's not exactly what it was when I was young, because they do have the internet, and Taylor Swift has been singing, and again and again and again and again. So there's no escaping any of these issues. And so in every real life community on the ground, they will have a completely unique mixture. And the only thing you have going for you is love. That is all you have. And for my father's story, I think back on his story, and I really wish I had thought of this before he died, because I think about the fact that he grew up in all those little communities, mostly in the Midwest, Depression, and then World War II years. And then he went to Calvin, which he knew because they had family there at Calvin, and so aunts and uncles. So he's part of that sub-community too. But that was more urban. And then he goes to Paterson, New Jersey, and he's around Black people. And I'm pretty sure he didn't mean any Black folks in Lytton, Iowa, or Hancock, Minnesota. And so then the question is, how on earth would he learn to minister to people coming up in the Great Migration, mostly from the Carolinas, and being in Paterson, New Jersey? He knew how to love. And that was how he then, became really embraced by that community and would live out that community. And the weirdness that Northside Chapel was then got built into me. So then when I get the weirdness of Sacramento, the weirdness of all the stuff here, at least I learned from my father and my grandfather, this is kind of what love looks like. But it's not going to be Oli Bowl, and it's not going to be Hotting, and it's going to be strange. Go ahead, John.
But if this is to Nathan Wood's desire to make this an on-the-ground, in real life experience, if you truly love the people whose community you have joined, show that by inviting yourself to dinner or lunch into these people's homes and show an interest in how they came to be who they are. Because that'll help you understand how you, at a very personal level, fit in with those people. Listen to their stories, find out where they've come from, find out what the meaning is of different rituals, and that's the way you come to participate. No, Tayo. No.
Impose estuary on the at all costs.
No. It is dinner group. It is dinner group. See, another thing that I do in my church is I promote dinner group, and that is not an estuary. That is just gathering around the table and listening to each other's stories.
Yeah.
And that is the most wonderful way in which you can show people that you love and respect them, and you will never be cast out.
Thank you.
Any response you want to make, Nathan? Then I'm going to land the plane.
No, that was great. Thank you, gentlemen. That was helpful.
You can invite them to your house too. You don't have to.
That's
allowed. I'm just saying.
Your missionary wife and your children. So
Oh, I do real quick, Paul. Just a little tidbit before I leave here, or you land the plane. Our bishop, Bishop Thomas, he's actually originally from Paterson, New Jersey, and he is a former history. His background was in history major in college. So.
Wow.
I'll make one more comment too, Paul. I was
go
talking
ahead, Laremy.
to Rin Goodhart, aka Rinska Decker, who also, her dad ran like a landscaping business in like southern New Jersey. But I asked her if she knew who you were, and she said she did. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I saw him once." I was like, "That guy looks exactly like his dad. He is the exact image of Stan Vanderklay." Is that your dad's name?
That is my father's name.
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, Paul was from way up." I mean, there was her New Jersey and your New Jersey were not the same New Jersey, but you guys were probably about the same age, and probably
my father was regionally famous because he had
to ask for money.
Yeah, he had to ask for money to run little programs in Paterson for the kids, but he knew how to love, and so yeah, he knew how to love, and that will get you all over the world. It really will.
It's interesting that the son of the missional part of the CRC is the one making waves in the wider culture. There might be a reason for that. Just saying.
All right, there you go. You got the final word, CW. Laramie, thank you so much for joining us. And you are now, if you are willing to be on other channels, you will probably get some invites.
All right.
And John Van Donk, when he's driving through, will try and find you a good estuary leader so that you can hold it in your coffee shop.
I don't even have to go there to do that.
Yeah. We like to say conveniently located between New York and LA.
Come see me when you're in Minneapolis, dude.
It really is a delightful place, though.
All right.
Only they serve patty.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Right. I'm gonna bring in the branding. Here we go.
Approaches are that's where the alignment is between Graham and I.
Okay, so what is bringing down the fourth wall project, Graham?
A terrible spell. And part of that spell, the humans have a campfire circuitry. For whatever reason, probably because it. So like, the television engages that, and like that's when your tribal elders are passing on information and stuff. So like those things are hijacked and make everybody feel like they're audience. And like if you watch characters in series that do break the fourth wall, and that's what the fourth wall I'm referencing when I do it. It's the wall behind which you are audience and not a human. So.
Okay.
Hashtag paintball for Jesus, @GrimGrizz, hashtag break the fourth wall.
So like you do like break the fourth wall that doesn't exist and be like,
break the fourth wall a little bit.
You really helped me break the fourth wall, because it's just people.
Good poetry is definitely always trying to break the fourth wall.
Always tried, as GrimGrizz says, to break the fourth wall to the degree that I can.
I waited for the Lord on high. I waited, and he heard my cry. Tell him we're dancing. We're busy dancing right now.